Welcome to Griffonomics, where we conduct financial investigations to define the risk before we look at the reward. Today, we're diving into Centrus Energy, trading under the ticker LEU. Centrus Energy is executing a deliberate transition from a commodity fuel reseller to a foundational nuclear infrastructure utility, leveraging an exclusive U.S. license for HALEU production and a massive $3.9 billion backlog. This strategic pivot creates a unique value proposition, positioning the company as the primary domestic enabler for the next generation of advanced reactors amid a massive federal push for energy sovereignty.
Exactly.
So if you are looking at the energy sector right now, you are probably seeing this massive macro narrative playing out across the board.
Oh, absolutely.
We have tech giants, the hyperscalers, the artificial intelligence data centers. They're all just completely desperate for baseload carbon-free power.
Right, because AI takes so much electricity.
Yeah, and they were all pointing to nuclear energy as the silver bullet for this. But if you actually want to understand how a macro narrative becomes a reality, you cannot just look at the reactor companies.
No, you really can't.
You have to look at the supply chain. You have to look at the fuel.
Which is where the actual bottleneck is.
Exactly. So for you as the listener, our mission today is to unpack this massive stack of Q1 2026 financial reports, earnings call transcripts, industry analysis, and, frankly, a flurry of recent highly strategic partnership announcements from Centrus Energy.
They've been very busy.
They really have. We are going to look closely at their integrations with Palantir, Oklo, Fluor, and Geiger Brothers.
Yeah.
You're going to sift through all of this to figure out if Centrus Energy is genuinely a sustainable generational infrastructure play, or, if it is just a high-risk government contracting bet that's highly susceptible to bureaucratic friction.
And I think that is the fundamental tension with this company right now. When you look at Centrus today, you are basically watching an enterprise attempting to build an entirely new domestic industry from scratch.
Right.
While simultaneously managing the heavily regulated, politically fraught decline of their legacy business. This is not a clean, linear software startup scaling up user acquisition.
No. Definitely
This is heavy, physical, highly radioactive industrial infrastructure.
And the physical scale of what they are attempting to execute in 2026 is, frankly, it's staggering. Right now, Centrus is in the middle of this massive scaling effort, moving from essentially being a middleman like a reseller of enriched uranium to becoming a high-rate, fully domestic manufacturer.
Massive pivot.
If you look at their capital deployment guidance for 2026, they're projecting a spend of somewhere between $350 million to $500 million this year alone.
Which is a huge jump.
It is. That is $500 million being pushed into the ground in a single 12-month window.
So to really understand where all that capital is flowing, you have to look at the two interconnected industrial hubs they are rapidly building out.
Okay, lay it out for us.
First, you have a massive $560 million investment taking place down in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Right. Oak Ridge?
Yeah. This is their dedicated centrifuge manufacturing plant. They are taking this facility and transforming it into a high-rate manufacturing hub capable of churning out thousands of their advanced AC-100M centrifuges.
I want to pause right there because we throw the word centrifuge around a lot when talking about nuclear energy, but I think we need to understand what this actually means in a physical sense.
Yeah, it's important context.
Like, these are not small tabletop devices you see in a medical lab spinning vials of blood.
Not at all. A gaseous centrifuge used for uranium enrichment is an absolute marvel of extreme engineering. We are talking about towering cylindrical machines, often dozens of feet tall.
Wow, dozens of feet tall.
Yeah, and they're spinning at supersonic speeds inside a vacuum. The mechanical stress on the materials is just immense.
I can't even imagine the physics of that.
It's wild. What Centrus is building at Oak Ridge with the AC-100M model is proprietary, highly classified technology. Basically, you pump uranium hexafluoride gas into these spinning towers, and the centrifugal force pushes the heavier uranium-238 isotopes toward the outer wall.
Okay, so the heavy stuff goes outside.
Right, while the lighter uranium-235, which is the fissile isotope that actually powers the reactor that collects near the center to be extracted.
Got it.
But one centrifuge does almost nothing on its own. You have to pipe them together in massive interconnected lines called cascades where the gas is passed from machine to machine.
Ah, so it just keeps getting refined.
Exactly, getting slightly more enriched at every single stage.
So Oak Ridge is where they are building the actual machines, the hardware.
Yes, exactly.
But those machines have to go somewhere to actually be plugged in and spun. And that brings us to the second piece of the puzzle, which is in Piketon, Ohio.
Right, the enrichment site.
Yeah, that is where they are expanding the actual enrichment facility to house and operate these thousands of centrifuges. And the catalyst funding this Ohio expansion is really what caught my eye in the reports.
The DOE money.
Exactly. In January of 2026, the U.S. Department of Energy, the DOE, awarded Centrus a $900 million task order specifically to bring commercial-scale HALEU capacity online in Piketon.
Let's define HAU for a moment because it is literally the entire cornerstone of this thesis.
Please do.
HALEU stands for high-assay, low-enriched uranium. The existing fleet of massive legacy nuclear reactors scattered across the United States, they run on LEU, or low-enriched uranium.
Right, the traditional stuff.
Yeah, which is enriched to about 3% to 5% uranium-235. But the next generation of nuclear technology, the small modular reactors, the micro-reactors that tech companies want to use to power their data centers, those require HAU.
And what's the difference in enrichment there?
HALEU is enriched all the way up to between 5% or 20%.
Oh, that's a big jump.
Huge jump. The higher enrichment allows these new reactors to be much smaller, much more efficient, and run for years or even decades without needing to be refueled.
Okay, so the DOE hands Centrus a $900 million check to get this commercial-scale HALEU capacity online. But building out a facility to enrich and handle this highly specialized material is incredibly complex.
To say the least.
Centrus isn't taking this $900 million and trying to pour the concrete themselves, right? And I think this is a critical strategic decision we need to analyze.
Absolutely.
They are actively outsourcing the physical build-out to mitigate their own execution bottlenecks. So they brought in Fluor Corporation to serve as their engineering, procurement, and construction, or EPC contract.
Which is a very deliberate de-risking strategy on their part. Centrus is keeping the highly classified proprietary centrifuge design and the Oak Ridge manufacturing know-how strictly in-house.
Right, you don't share that?
No, that is their crown jewel. But they recognize they're not a general construction firm. So Fluor is stepping in to manage the overarching design, the global supply chain, and the procurement of the massive amounts of highly specialized materials required.
Like what kind of materials?
The specialized piping, the vacuum systems, the electrical switchgear, all the heavy industrial stuff.
But Fluor isn't necessarily out there in the mud driving the bulldozers either, right?
Yeah, no, usually they sub that out.
Yeah, for the actual on-the-ground heavy lifting construction in Piketon, Ohio, they partnered with Geiger Brothers. And if you look into Geiger Brothers' history with Centrus, this makes perfect sense.
They have a long history together.
They really do. Geiger actually helped build Centrus's earlier LEU demonstration cascade back in 2013, as well as their recent HAU demonstration cascade.
And that localization factor with Geiger Brothers is just crucial. When you are building a nuclear facility, you are not just building a warehouse.
Definitely not.
The regulatory environment, which is overseen by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, requires intense quality assurance at every single step of the build.
I can imagine the paperwork is insane.
It is. Every weld must be inspected. Every pour of concrete has to meet exact specifications, and Geiger Brothers knows the Piketon site intimately.
All right, they've been there.
They understand the specific union labor dynamics in southern Ohio. They already have the necessary security protocols and clearances in place.
Which takes forever to get.
Exactly. If Centrus had brought in an outside contractor who had never worked on a nuclear site before, the learning curve alone could have delayed the project by years.
That makes total sense. But even with great partners like Fluor and Geiger Brothers, managing an estimated $5 billion to $7 billion total build-out over the next decade across hundreds of different suppliers, that is an absolute logistical nightmare.
Oh, a total nightmare.
You're dealing with thousands of moving parts, union labor schedules, weather delays, and specialized component tracking. And this brings us to a partnership that, at first glance, almost feels out of place for a heavy industrial company.
The Palantir deal.
Yes. In March 2026, Centrus announced a strategic integration with Palantir Technologies.
Yeah.
If you look at the Q1 cash flows, Centrus prepaid $5 million to Palantir right out of the gate to lock this in.
Just paid it right up front.
Yeah. They are integrating Palantir's Foundry and Artificial Intelligence Platform, or AIP, across both their classified and unclassified environments.
Right.
The goal is to optimize project controls, manufacturing execution, and supply chain logistics in real time. And the headline number they are touting is that they have already identified $300 million in potential cost savings just from the initial integration.
It's a huge claim.
It is. Now, I want to unpack this because whenever I hear a heavy industrial company claim massive savings by slapping the label artificial intelligence onto a project, I get doubly skeptical.
As you should.
It sounds like they are taking this Palantir software and using it as a central nervous system, implanting it into this massive, clumsy physical body, the multi-billion-dollar construction project, to stop it from hemorrhaging cash and making uncoordinated movement.
It's a good analogy.
But my question is, does software actually solve real-world physical supply chain bottlenecks?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, because if you were waiting on a truck full of specialized steel from a foundry in Pennsylvania and the truck breaks down on the highway, Palantir's AI cannot magically manifest that steel in Ohio. So how does this actually protect their gross margins?
It is a fair skepticism, absolutely. But you have to understand how cascading delays work in massive construction projects. It is rarely just a broken-down truck that kills your margin.
What is it then?
It is the fact that the truck was delayed, which means the welding crew standing around on site cannot work. And because the welding crew cannot work, the electrical team scheduled for the following week cannot pull the wire. Suddenly, a 3-day delay on a valve turns into a 3-week delay on the critical path, and you are paying thousands of dollars an hour for specialized union labor to literally stand idle.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. The ripple effect.
Exactly. What Palantir's AIP does is ingest all of those disparate data nodes, the GPS on the truck, the inventory at the foundry, the labor schedules in Ohio, the weather patterns, the regulatory inspection timelines.
It sees everything at once.
Yes. It acts as a massive predictive hedge. If the AI sees that a specific shipment of vacuum pumps is tracking 2 weeks behind schedule, it immediately simulates the impact on the entire project timeline.
So it rewrites things.
It rewrites logistics, adjusts the labor deployment, and it flags the critical path so the project managers can shift the Geiger Brothers construction crews to work on a totally different section of the cascade before the entire factory floor has to literally hit the emergency stop button.
So it is not about preventing the physical delay of a single part. It is about preventing that single delay from compounding and destroying the entire master schedule.
Exactly. And let me give you a very specific, painful historical example from Centrus's own recent past to illustrate why this level of logistical oversight is a matter of survival for them.
Oh, please. I love historical examples.
Back during Phase 2 of their HALEU operations contract, Centrus had successfully completed their demonstration cascade.
Okay.
The centrifuges were spinning. They were successfully producing the enriched LEU gas. But under the contract, the DOE was obligated to provide these highly specific storage containers called 5B cylinders to collect the radioactive output.
I remember reading about these. These aren't just empty propane tanks, right?
Far from it.
Alex?
A 5B cylinder is a massive, thick-walled steel cask designed to hold radioactive uranium hexafluoride gas under incredibly strict thermal and pressure conditions.
Wow.
They have to undergo rigorous testing to ensure they can survive transportation accidents, fires, and drops without breaching.
So they're highly engineered.
Very. And due to severe physical, real-world supply chain challenges in the specialty steel and manufacturing sector, the DOE could not get enough of these 5B cylinders delivered to the Piketon site on time.
Oh, wow. So Centrus had the million-dollar machine spinning. They were creating the most valuable, highly sought-after nuclear fuel on the planet, and they literally had nowhere to put it.
Yes. Because of that one missing physical link, the storage cylinder Centrus had to halt production entirely.
That is brutal.
They could not meet their mandated November 2024 delivery milestone, and the contract performance period had to be officially extended by the government all the way out to June 2025.
Ouch.
That delay ate into their margins, it delayed their revenue recognition, and it stalled the momentum of the entire domestic HALEU program.
So they got burned by a physical bottleneck before.
Exactly. That is the exact type of cascading physical failure that Palantir's AI is designed to foresee and mitigate. If you are going to spend $5 billion to $7 billion scaling this up, you cannot afford to have a $5 million missing component grind the entire multi-billion-dollar machine to a halt.
Which perfectly illustrates the tension between their future promises and their current reality. When you look at the macro narrative for Centrus, you see this massive, beautiful number, a $3.9 billion total backlog of orders that stretches all the way out to 2040.
It's a huge backlog.
It looks incredible on a pitch deck.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at their actual Q1 2026 earnings report, You see the immense friction of trying to turn that future $3.9 billion backlog into actual cash today.
The conversion friction is very real.
It really is. Let's look closely at those Q1 numbers, because this is where the accounting tells the real story of the business. Centrus reported a GAAP net income of $10.0 million, which translates to about $1.45 per share.
Right.
If you are an investor, you see that and think, okay, solid, modest profitability. But Centrus heavily promoted an adjusted or non-GAAP net income of $23.5 million, or $1.05 per share.
Massive difference.
Yeah. And Wall Street algorithms saw that $1.05 and called it a massive earnings beat. Now, whenever a management team tells me to ignore their official GAAP numbers and instead look at an adjusted number that magically doubles their profitability, warning sirens go off in my head.
Naturally.
That is often how companies hide deeply flawed operations. We need to look at exactly what they excluded from their actual costs to get that higher non-GAAP number.
Yeah.
They added back $400,000 in stock-based compensation, which is pretty standard across the board.
Very standard.
But the massive adjustment was adding back $17 million in what they called advanced technology costs.
And that skepticism is completely warranted. But in this specific case, understanding that $17 million adjustment is actually the key to understanding the sheer friction of their rapid scale-up.
How so?
Those advanced technology costs are essentially what we would call growth costs or readiness costs. Think about what is happening in Ohio and Tennessee right now. Centrus is hiring hundreds of new employees, engineers, technicians, security personnel.
Right, staffing up.
Because this is a nuclear facility handling highly enriched weapons-capable material, you cannot just hire someone off the street and put them on the floor the next day.
Right, I assume the background checks are intense.
They are. These employees have to go through months of rigorous, specialized training. They have to pass extensive federal background checks to secure the necessary security clearances from the DOE.
And that takes time and money.
Immense time and capital. Furthermore, Centrus is spending millions prepping the manufacturing floors, upgrading the IT infrastructure to handle the Palantir integration, and establishing the security perimeters.
So they are bleeding cash just getting the humans and the environment ready for the machines.
Precisely. And here is where the accounting rules come into play. Because this $17 million was spent before the actual physical assets, the centrifuges and the cascades were built and officially placed into service, standard GAAP accounting rules state that you cannot capitalize those costs.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you cannot add them to the value of the asset on the balance sheet. Instead, you have to take the hit directly on the income statement as an operating expense right now in the quarter the money is spent.
Okay. So management is essentially saying to the market, look, we know our GAAP income is only $10 million, but please ignore this $17 million expense because it is not a recurring failure of our core business. It's just the upfront, uncapitalizable penalty we have to pay to get our multi-billion-dollar scale-up ready for prime time.
That is exactly the argument they're making. They are absorbing massive near-term friction and depressing their current GAAP margins to build the administrative and human capacity that will eventually service that $3.9 billion backlog.
But this begs a vital question. Why sprint? Why spend so aggressively right now? Why guide for $350 million to $500 million in capital expenditures in a single year, knowing it is going to drag down your immediate profitability?
It comes down to the customers.
Exactly. The answer lies in the massive downstream demand they are racing to meet. In June 2026, Centrus announced a major partnership with an advanced reactor company called HALEU.
A very strategic partnership.
Very. Centrus signed a letter of intent to supply the HALEU required to fuel up to 5 of HALEU's Aurora powerhouses. And here is the critical part. They established a hard, aggressive target to begin deliveries to HALEU by 2029.
And I cannot stress this enough. In the world of heavy nuclear infrastructure, 2029 is basically tomorrow.
Right. 3 years is nothing in nuclear time.
The timeline is incredibly compressed, but the HALEU partnership is fascinating not just because of the timeline, but because of how they are actively structuring this deal to bypass systemic industry bottlenecks.
Break that down for us.
It is crucial to understand that producing HALEU is only one step in a much longer, highly complex fuel cycle.
Yeah.
When the HALEU comes out of the centrifuges in Ohio, it is in the form of a gas uranium hexafluoride, or UF6.
Okay, so it's a gas.
But advanced reactors like HALEU's Aurora powerhouses do not run on radioactive gas. They need that material converted into a solid form, typically a specialized metal alloy or an oxide pellet.
Right. They need solid fuel.
Exactly. That chemical transformation process is called deconversion.
Wait, so they are enriching all this gas in Ohio, but right now, who actually deconverts it? Where do they send it?
That is the glaring hole in the entire domestic supply chain. Currently, there is no commercial-scale deconversion facility for HALEU operating in the United States.
Are you serious? So it is a massive missing link. You can spin all the gas you want, but if you cannot turn it into metal, the reactor companies cannot use it.
Exactly. The supply chain would effectively hit a brick wall. So to solve this, Centrus and Oklo didn't just sign a fuel supply agreement. They announced a joint venture to literally build a domestic HALEU deconversion facility together.
Okay, that's smart.
And the strategic masterstroke is where they plan to put it. They are going to co-locate this new deconversion facility directly on the Centrus footprint in Piketon, Ohio. And furthermore, Oklo is planning to build their 1.2 gigawatt power campus right there as well.
So if I am visualizing this, you have the Centrus cascade spinning the uranium gas. They take that gas and essentially pipe it right next door to the joint venture facility to chemically deconvert it into solid metal fuel.
Yes.
Then they take that solid fuel and walk it across the street to plug it directly into the Oklo reactors that are generating power on the exact same geographic footprint.
Yes. They are creating a fully enclosed, vertically integrated domestic nuclear hub. The efficiency gains are massive.
I mean, the shipping alone.
Think about the alternative. If the deconversion facility were located in another state, Centrus would have to load highly radioactive, weapons-grade HALEU gas into those massive 5B cylinders we talked about.
Which we know is a bottleneck.
Right. They would have to load them onto specialized, heavily armed transport convoys. They would have to navigate a labyrinth of NRC transportation regulations, cross state lines, and deal with immense security costs and insurance premiums just to get the material to the next step in the supply chain.
Sounds like a nightmare.
By co-locating the enrichment, the deconversion, and the power generation, they completely bypass the national transportation grid, they bypass the logistical nightmares, they radically improve their timeline and their margins.
The co-location strategy is brilliant from a logistics standpoint. I'll give them that.
Yeah.
But I have to question the sheer reality of this 2029 timeline. I mean, they are starting heavy construction and scale up in 2026.
It's tight.
They're promising to have the centrifuges running, the gas enriched, the joint venture deconversion facility built and operational, and the final metal fuel delivered to Oklo by 2029. That is a razor-thin margin for error.
Very thin.
If we think about this in commercial terms, it feels like a band selling out a massive global stadium tour before they have even finished drafting the blueprints for the stadiums. Yes, the ticket sales, the $3.9 billion backlog, look phenomenal on the balance sheet. But the conversion friction is terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
If they miss a single construction milestone, if Geiger Brothers runs into labor disputes, if Fluor cannot source the vacuum pumps, if Palantir's AI cannot save the critical path, and those centrifuges aren't spinning and producing solid fuel by 2029, the penalty is going to be severe. If you miss your cornerstone delivery to a flagship partner like Oklo, the market will punish the stock mercilessly.
The execution risk is the undeniable shadow over the entire valuation. That $3.9 billion backlog is entirely theoretical until the physical infrastructure is completed on time, licensed by the NRC, and operating at commercial scale.
So while they are engaged in this high-wire act of building the future, we have to look at the engine that is currently keeping the lights on. We need to perform a strict forensic audit of their legacy business.
Yeah, the LEU segment.
Right, because Centrus didn't just appear out of nowhere in 2026. Historically, they have operated as a major reseller of traditional nuclear fuel. This is their LEU, or low-enriched uranium segment, which supplies the standard 3% to 5% enriched fuel used by the massive existing fleet of commercial nuclear reactors worldwide.
The legacy fleet.
Exactly. But if you look at the Q1 2026 results for this legacy LEU segment, the math initially looks incredibly concerning. Revenue for the segment dropped 13% down to $44.6 million.
A decent hit.
Yeah. But to understand why it dropped, we need to look at the underlying metrics of how this fuel is actually sold.
This is where we really need to dive into the core mechanics of the industry. The LEU segment doesn't just sell uranium by the pound.
Right. It's not like buying coal.
No, they sell enrichment services, and the standard unit of measurement for this service is called a separative work unit, or SWU.
Let's make sure everyone understands this, because SWU is one of those opaque industry terms.
Yeah.
SWU is not a physical bucket of uranium, right?
Correct. It is not a physical object. A SWU is a measure of effort. It measures the amount of work, the energy, and the machine time required to separate the isotopes of uranium to achieve a specific concentration of uranium-235.
Oh,
Think of it like a measure of computational power or manufacturing effort rather than a measure of weight. And in the first quarter of 2026, Centrus experienced a massive 47% drop in the volume of SW sold compared to the exact same period the year before.
a 47% drop in sales volume sounds like a catastrophic loss of market share. But then you look at the pricing side of the equation. In that same quarter, they actually saw a 52% increase in the average selling price of SW.
So prices went way up.
So the price of their product skyrocketed, but mathematically, that 47% cliff in the volume of units sold completely overwhelmed the 52% price spike, leading to that overall 13% decline in segment revenue.
Right, the math just didn't work out in their favor that quarter.
But when you listen to the earnings calls, management constantly insists that this volume drop is not a sign of fundamental weakness in the business. Why are they so confident that losing half their sales volume in a single quarter isn't a disaster?
Because you have to understand how utility companies actually buy nuclear fuel. This is an incredibly lumpy, episodic business. We are not talking about consumer retail, where you expect smooth month-over-month growth.
It's not a subscription model.
Exactly. In Q1 2026, the average size of a single customer order for Centrus was $13.7 million.
Wow, so these are massive singular orders.
Yes. Utility companies plan their reactor refueling outages years in advance. These are massive multi-year contracts that dictate annual, not quarterly purchase commitments.
Okay, so timing is everything.
A utility might schedule to take delivery of an entire year's worth of custom-engineered fuel assemblies in October instead of February. Therefore, a relatively small shift in the delivery schedule of just one or two massive orders can create wild volatility on a quarterly income statement.
So a shipment slips a week into the next quarter, and suddenly your Q1 looks terrible.
Precisely. This is why management consistently stresses that performance in the LEU segment must be judged on a trailing 12-month or TTM basis. Looking at a single 90-day window provides a completely distorted picture of the actual demand.
That makes a lot of sense. It is like judging a luxury yacht builder's performance based on the single week they didn't deliver a boat. You have to zoom out to the annual cycle.
Great analogy.
But we cannot talk about this legacy LEU segment without addressing the massive geopolitical elephant in the room. A significant portion of the LEU that Centrus currently resells to these utility companies does not originate in the United States.
No, it does not.
It actually comes from Russia via a long-standing supply contract with a Russian state-owned entity called 10X, and that contract runs through 2028.
This is perhaps the most delicate geopolitical tightrope any U.S. energy company is walking right now.
I can imagine.
Centrus, and its predecessor companies, historically relied heavily on this Russian supply as part of the post-Cold War efforts to downblend Russian nuclear material for commercial use. It was a swords to plowshares thing.
Right.
But the global landscape shifted violently following the invasion of Ukraine. In response, the U.S. government enacted the Prohibiting Russian Uranium Imports Act, explicitly targeting and banning Russian uranium from the domestic market.
Which directly hits Centrus.
It does. And in retaliation, the Russian government issued a decree prohibiting LEU exports under certain conditions.
So they are caught in the crossfire.
Currently, Centrus is operating under a series of highly specific waivers and supply quotas allowed by the U.S. government. These waivers are designed to prevent a sudden shock to the U.S. power grid.
Because we still need the power.
Right. It ensures Centrus can still import just enough Russian LEU to meet their existing locked-in contractual obligations to U.S. utility companies through 2028. But the writing is permanently on the wall. That supply chain is actively and legally being phased out.
So Centrus is caught right in the middle of a global energy decoupling. They have to keep this legacy Russian 10X contract alive, meticulously managing these delicate government waivers and import quotas just long enough to fulfill their old obligations to their current customers.
A very balancing act.
They have to manage the controlled demolition of their old supply chain without letting all this geopolitical turbulence crash the massive new domestic manufacturing engine they're building in Ohio and Tennessee.
It is the ultimate structural replacement. They are deliberately orchestrating the managed decline of a lumpy, geopolitically risky, low-margin reselling business and racing to replace it with a high-margin, technologically advanced, fully domestic manufacturing business.
And that deliberate pivot leads us directly into understanding how Centrus is transforming from a traditional merchant into a critical arm of the state. We are seeing profound structural tailwinds that are literally turning Centrus into a systemically important national security asset.
The shift is undeniable.
If you want to see where the real future of the company lies, you have to look beyond the legacy LEU segment and look at their technical solutions division. This is the division that handles the advanced manufacturing, the engineering work, and the highly sensitive government contracts.
The growth engine.
Yeah. In Q1 2026, while the LEU segment was contracting, the Technical Solutions Division saw its revenue surge by 47%, hitting $32.1 million. And if you dig into the filings, that surge was driven almost entirely by a $9.8 million bump in revenue, specifically from their HALEU operations contract.
This is where we really define the economic moat that Centrus is aggressively deepening. You have to look at their regulatory and licensing position.
Which is pretty unique, right?
It's monopolistic. Centrus currently holds a unique position as the absolute only facility in the United States licensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to produce commercial-scale HALEU.
The only one.
The only one. And why does that matter so much? Because when you look at the Department of Energy's developmental pipeline for the next generation of advanced nuclear reactors, roughly 9 out of 10 of those designs require HALEU to function.
So the whole industry depends on them.
Exactly. If Centrus fails to scale up its Piketon facility, the entire multi-billion-dollar pipeline of American advanced nuclear technology is left completely stranded without fuel. They are the single choke point for the entire industry.
And because they are that essential choke point, the way they generate revenue in this division is entirely different from a standard commercial business. They operate heavily on federal task orders, like the massive HALEU operations contract we discussed.
Right.
And it is crucial to understand that these are not your typical commercial sales. These contracts are frequently structured as cost-plus incentive fee agreements.
Which is massive for them. The cost-plus structure completely fundamentally alters the risk profile of the company. Think about a traditional commercial market. A company has to raise its own capital, spend millions on R&D, build a manufacturing plant, produce a product, put it on a shelf, and then cross its fingers and hope a customer decides to buy it.
Right, they take all the risk.
They absorb all the upfront risk and what we call ramping friction. With a cost-plus incentive fee government contract, that dynamic is inverted. The Department of Energy is essentially reimbursing Centrus for all the direct, allowable costs of building and operating the centrifuge cascade.
So they don't eat the R&D costs.
Exactly. On top of covering those costs, the government pays Centrus a targeted profit fee, which scales based on their performance and efficiency.
Wow, that's a nice deal.
This provides highly stabilized, government-backed revenue. The U.S. taxpayer is effectively funding Centrus's steep technological learning curve. The government absorbs the financial risk of demonstrating this highly complex technology, ensuring the company doesn't bankrupt itself trying to solve the physics of domestic enrichment.
It is an incredible advantage.
Yeah.
But the federal government's involvement doesn't stop at just subsidizing the production of the fuel. If we really want to understand the macro picture, we have to look at the federal force multiplier happening downstream.
The demand side.
Exactly. Recently, the Department of Energy announced a massive $17.5 billion federal loan package designated specifically to speed the deployment of 10 new large Westinghouse AP1000 reactors across the country.
This is the critical demand-side equation. You have to connect the $17.5 billion loan to Centrus's long-term business model.
Oh, so?
Well, why is the government stepping in with almost $20 billion in loans to build reactors? Because the last time commercial reactors were built in the U.S., the Vogel project in Georgia, it went billions of dollars over budget and severely damaged the companies involved.
Right. It was a financial disaster for them.
Private capital markets are currently terrified of the exactly. And who will be buying the electricity from those reactors? Private tech companies, hyperscalers, and AI data centers, locking in long-term power purchase agreements.
It's all connected.
The entire ecosystem is deeply symbiotic. The government guarantees the reactors get built, the tech sector guarantees the electricity gets purchased, and the massive capital flowing from the tech sector indirectly flows all the way down the supply chain to pay for Centrus's domestically enriched fuel.
When you lay it out like that, it forces me to ask a critical question about the very nature of this company. Is Centrus Energy even a traditional business anymore? Or are we looking at something more akin to a strategic mineral equivalent, like a highly protected, government-subsidized utility choke point, where the standard rules of free market capitalism, of supply and demand, are effectively suspended by the Pentagon and the DOE in the name of national security?
It is undoubtedly functioning as a national security choke point, but I would argue it operates much higher up the value chain than a traditional strategic mineral play.
How do you mean?
If you invest in a mining company that digs up lithium or antimony, that company is entirely at the mercy of global commodity spot prices, extraction yields, and resource nationalism. Anyone with a shovel and a patch of dirt can theoretically compete in the commodity market.
True, it's just raw material.
Centrus is not digging dirt. Centrus is providing a highly specialized, technologically advanced service, isotopic enrichment. Because they hold the exclusive NRC license, and because they control the proprietary, highly classified AC100M centrifuge technology, their barrier to entry is almost insurmountable for a new domestic competitor.
You can't just start a uranium enrichment company in your garage.
No, a startup cannot simply raise venture capital and decide to start enriching weapons-capable uranium in a warehouse.
Yeah.
The regulatory and technological moat is infinitely deep. The government isn't just protecting a commodity, they are protecting an irreplaceable sovereign technological capability.
Which brings us to the crucial question of how Centrus manages the financials of this protected capability. Let's look closely at their capital allocation and what I call the infrastructure playbook.
Yes, their balance sheet strategy is fascinating.
When you look at the Centrus balance sheet, you see some serious structural financial power. They exited Q1 2026 reporting an impressive $1.9 billion in unrestricted cash and cash equivalents.
That's a massive war chest.
It is. A significant portion of that liquidity wasn't generated from operations. It was built up strategically over the last 12 to 24 months through multiple convertible note offerings. They have spent 2 years meticulously preparing a massive war chest to fund this Piketon and Oak Ridge expansion.
And raising that capital is only half the battle. Preserving the long-term value of the enterprise while they deploy that war chest is equally critical. This brings us to a highly specific, highly defensive financial maneuver that management executed recently.
The rights agreement.
At their June 18, 2026 annual meeting, stockholders approved an extension of the company's Section 382 rights agreement, extending it all the way through June 2029. In doing so, they also raised the trigger price for Series A preferred shares to an incredibly specific and very high $11,143.95.
Now, to you, the average listener, hearing the phrase Section 382 rights agreement probably sounds like the most boring, impenetrable financial jargon imaginable. But this is actually a fascinating mechanism. What does this agreement actually do in plain English?
In plain English, it is an aggressive, defensive shield designed to protect one of the company's most valuable off-balance sheet assets, their historical net operating loss, or NOL, carry-forwards.
Explain how they got those losses, because it's important context.
To understand why this is so valuable, you have to look at the painful history of this company. Centrus used to be known as USEC, the United States Enrichment Corporation.
Right, the old legacy company.
For decades, they operated massive, incredibly inefficient, power-hungry gaseous diffusion enrichment plants that covered square miles in Paducah, Kentucky, and Portsmouth, Ohio. As the industry modernized, those plants became completely obsolete. USEC spent billions of dollars and years of grueling research and development trying to transition to modern, efficient centrifuge technology.
And it almost killed them.
It did. During that long, painful transition, which eventually led to a bankruptcy restructuring and the reemergence as Centrus, the company incurred massive, staggering financial losses.
But those losses have value now.
Yes, because the IRS tax code contains a provision. It allows companies that suffer heavy losses to carry those historical losses forward into the future to offset future taxable income.
So it's a tax shield.
Exactly. This means that when the Centrus finally scales up, when the Oklo deliveries start, and when they become massively profitable, they won't have to pay federal income taxes on those profits for a very long time.
Yeah.
They can legally shield those new profits by writing them off against the ghosts of their old losses.
I love the mechanics of this. It's like these historical NOL carry-forwards act as a massive financial blast shield. The company endured years of severe financial pain, bankruptcies, and massive losses just to develop and perfect the centrifuge tech.
So much pain.
Now that they have finally crossed the desert, Now that they are on the verge of massive multi-billion-dollar profitability with these DOE contracts, this Section 382 agreement ensures the IRS doesn't step in and wipe out those accumulated tax write-offs just as they're about to become valuable.
Exactly. But there is a massive catch in the IRS tax code that threatens this shield. Under IRS Section 382 rules, if a company experiences a major ownership change, which is legally defined as a single entity or group of entities buying up 5% or more of the company's stock over a rolling 3-year period, the IRS can step in and severely restrict or entirely eliminate the company's ability to use those historical NOLs.
Oh, wow. So if Wall Street starts buying too much, they lose the tax break.
Yes. The rights agreement that the stockholders extended is effectively a lock-and-key mechanism, often referred to in corporate finance as a poison pill. If a hedge fund or an activist investor tries to aggressively buy up more than 4.99% of Centrus stock, the rights agreement is automatically triggered. It floods the market with new, discounted shares for all other existing shareholders, massively diluting the hostile buyer and preventing the ownership change from occurring.
That is aggressive.
It is a strict mathematical defense mechanism to ensure that the tax shield remains perfectly intact for all existing shareholders.
This entire strategy is a perfect example of how Centrus is operating completely differently from a typical energy play. If you are an investor looking for exposure to nuclear energy, you might be tempted to buy a high-beta uranium mining stock.
Sure, people do it all the time.
But if you invest in a uranium miner, you are constantly sweating the spot price of U308. You are hoping a geopolitical crisis doesn't flood the market with cheap ore. You are hoping the physical mine in Canada or Kazakhstan doesn't flood or face a labor strike.
There are so many variables.
So many. Centrus isn't playing that game. They are running a highly sophisticated infrastructural playbook. They are leveraging absolute technological monopolies with their centrifuges. They have the federal government heavily de-risking their demand curve and subsidizing their build-out.
Right.
And they're using complex corporate governance tools, like the Section 382 poison pill, to aggressively protect their future cash flows and tax shields from Wall Street volatility.
It is a highly engineered, deeply defensive corporate strategy. They are insulating themselves from the raw, chaotic volatility of the commodity mining sector by capturing all of their value at the absolute highest margin, most technologically complex, and most heavily regulated stage of the entire nuclear fuel cycle.
Which brings us to our final synthesis. We need to deliver a final verdict and look closely at the execution risks that could derail this entire thesis.
Because the risks are definitely there.
They are. We have established the macro narrative. We have analysts currently putting price targets on Centrus ranging broadly from $249 up to $275 per share, with some bullish outliers projecting even higher valuations.
Huge targets.
The core question for any capital allocator analyzing this deep dive is this. Does an enterprise acting as a critical, protected national security choke point, armed with a $3.9 billion backlog and a clear federal mandate, represent a structural generational value play at its current valuation? Or is there simply too much operational risk hiding in the massive physical execution required over the next 4 years?
The theoretical upside is abundantly clear, but the physical execution risks are severe, and they are highly concentrated. I see 3 primary risks that any investor must monitor obsessively.
Let's hear them. Risk number 1.
Risk number 1 is the sheer capital intensity of the project. Ramping up from a demonstration cascade to thousands of commercial centrifuges at Piketon and Oak Ridge is slated to cost anywhere from $5 billion to $7 billion over the long term.
That is just an astronomical amount of money.
It is. That means Centrus is facing persistent, incredibly heavy cash burn for years before the real revenue starts flowing. Even with $1.9 billion sitting in unrestricted cash on the balance sheet right now, they will almost certainly need to raise further capital.
So dilution is a possibility.
Definitely. Whether they secure that capital through additional massive DOE grants, lucrative customer prepayments from partners like LEU, or by taking on significant debt, the cost of that capital will impact their long-term equity value.
And risk number 2 is what I would classify as the administrative ramp-up lag. Their deepest moat is their reliance on the federal government, but that is also their biggest bottleneck.
The double-edged sword.
Exactly. We discussed the $900 million HALEU task order earlier, but we have to note that this was awarded under an IDIQ contract structure, an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity structure.
Right, which people often misunderstand.
Yeah, that means the $900 million is just a ceiling. Future funding and actual cash task orders under that ceiling are not automatically guaranteed to flow smoothly. They have to be continuously negotiated, justified, and congressionally appropriate.
And Congress is never predictable.
Never. If you look closely at recent events, there was an executive order, EO 14154, which temporarily paused specific federal funding streams for administrative review. While it was eventually resolved, it clearly demonstrates how quickly bureaucratic lags, endless reviews, or a sudden change in the political administration in Washington can completely stall the momentum of a company reliant on federal cash flow.
That administrative lag is a constant, suffocating headwind for any government contractor. But risk number 3 is perhaps the most acute, immediate operational threat to their 2026 and 2027 margins: margin compression and contractor risk.
Right, getting back to Geiger Brothers.
Yes. Remember the Geiger Brothers construction contract we discussed in Section 1? The contract to actually build the physical infrastructure in Ohio. It is critical to note that this contract is structured on a time and materials basis.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that, because the contract structure dictates who holds the bag when things go wrong. Why is a time and materials contract so dangerous for Centrus? Why didn't they just sign a fixed price contract to lock in their costs?
Because in first-of-a-kind, heavy nuclear construction, the unknowns are so vast that no competent construction firm will ever sign a fixed-price contract without baking in a massive 300% risk premium.
Right, Geiger Brothers isn't going to take that risk.
Exactly. Centrus had to accept a time and materials structure to get shovels in the ground. But a time and materials structure places the absolute risk of cost overruns squarely on the shoulders of Centrus, not the builder.
So if it takes longer, Centrus pays more.
Exactly. If Geiger Brothers encounters unexpected engineering issues with the concrete pours, if specialized union labor costs suddenly spike in Ohio, or if Fluor fails to procure the necessary materials on time, Geiger Brothers still gets paid for every hour their crews are on site and every piece of material they use. Centrus is the one who eats the overrun.
And we know delays happen.
We have already discussed how deeply vulnerable this company is to physical supply chain disruptions. Remember the DOE's catastrophic delay in delivering those 5B storage cylinders, which literally forced Centrus to halt HALEU production for months?
I do.
If the massive, multi-billion-dollar industrial milestones currently scheduled for Piketon face similar, unexpected delays, whether it's a delayed valve, a failed inspection, or a labor strike, the gross margins Centrus expects to generate will compress rapidly, and they will burn through that $1.9 billion war chest much faster than projected.
It really is the ultimate irony of the Centrus Energy story. The federal government is their greatest patron. The government is directly subsidizing their build-out, passing legislation to ban their primary geopolitical competitors from the market, and offering massive loans to build the downstream reactors that will buy their fuel.
Handing them the market, essentially.
But that same government, with its endless bureaucracy, its shifting political winds, and its historical inability to manage complex supply chains, is simultaneously their single biggest risk factor.
It's a crazy dynamic.
It is. The $3.9 billion backlog sitting on their books is a beautiful, highly bankable theoretical number. But the brutal friction of turning that future backlog into actual cash is entirely 100% dependent on flawless, on-the-ground physical execution by their contractors in the mud of Ohio and Tennessee.
It is a high-stakes race against time, against capital burn, and against the patience of the utility customers who desperately need this fuel to hit their own decarbonization targets. They have to finish building the physical infrastructure before the massive $1.9 billion capital war chest runs out.
Which leaves us with a final, forward-looking puzzle for you to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive. We have talked extensively about the massive legislative shield currently protecting Centrus, specifically the Prohibiting Russian Uranium Imports Act.
The ban.
Yeah, this law legally bans their primary state-sponsored geopolitical competitor from operating in the U.S. market, creating a massive, highly lucrative void that Centrus is aggressively rushing to fill with domestic production.
Right.
But if you read the actual fine print of that legislation, it is not permanent. It contains a hard statutory sunset clause. The ban on Russian uranium is currently only codified into law through the end of the year 2040.
Which forces any long-term investor to look past the current expansion cycle and ask a fundamental question about the future of global energy markets. What happens when the calendar flips to January 1st, 2041?
Right.
Will the U.S. domestic nuclear ecosystem, the massive centrifuge cascades in Piketon, the heavily integrated Oklo deconversion joint ventures, the advanced power campuses, will all of this be so deeply entrenched, so vertically integrated, and so technologically cost-efficient that it is fully globally self-sustained?
Or will it fall apart?
Exactly. When 2041 arrives, will that protective legislative moat simply evaporate overnight? And if it does, will Centrus be forced to once again compete on the brutal open market against massive state-sponsored global monopolies who can leverage sovereign wealth to aggressively undercut them on price?
It is the ultimate test of industrial policy. Are we watching a temporary, multi-billion-dollar government stimulus program designed to bridge a geopolitical crisis? Or are we witnessing the permanent, irreversible birth of a dominant domestic industry?
That is the big question.
That is the question you have to answer before deploying capital in this space. And that is all the time we have for today. Risk defined, portfolio protected.